Welcome to the Live Life for the Stories Season 1 finale. We made it. There are a few more lessons from the early days that I want to squeeze in before I start talking about the meaty stuff, aka production of my first international feature film, so bear with me as I fill in some of the gaps here. Today's overarching lesson is get into common interest groups with similar people and get experience in your field. There are a few smaller lessons I learned within the stories supporting the main lesson, so I'll reference those as we get into it. But anyway, Story 1, Fall 2008. Two of my best friends had been in theater since they were kids, and I had gone to see them at shows before, but I'd never been in one myself. I wanted to try out this experience, acting on a stage. And so in my freshman year of high school, I auditioned and I got a small part in a school play, a play called 1940s Radio Hour. I found that I didn't get stage fright, which is huge. Most people experience it, and I didn't for some reason. I'm not sure why, but it worked. So I didn't get stage fright, I could spend more time with my friends, and I also found that theater kids tended to be more flirtatious and sexual than a lot of other kids my age, and as a 13-year-old, that had a strong sway over me. So I had continued interest in theater for multiple reasons, but admittedly, the two primary reasons were to have friends and to meet girls. 1940s Radio Hour had 4 performances between November 8th, 2008 and November 15th, 2008. And then it was over. And to be honest, it felt like a lot of work for only 4 showings. I had the thought, isn't there a way to get something more out of all this work? And the idea of wanting to record the shows and make something that could be rewatched started to grow in my mind. Fun fact 1. York School students had a long-standing tradition of going to Plumes Cafe on Alvarado Street in Monterey after every play we performed in. And I got to be a part of that tradition while I was there. And wow, did I learn a lot from that location. I'll get more into it later, but that was where I learned that I absolutely hated the taste and feeling of coffee and couldn't drink it even if I wanted to. That inability to drink coffee sets me apart from a lot of people, but my taste buds and stomach still reject it to this day. I remember there was a moment when someone I was dating at the time pressured me to try an espresso shot, and, I never did again. Extra lesson 1. Good rap music can be good poetry. There was a senior in the cast of 1940s Radio Hour who was a freestyle rapper, and he taught me to beatbox so he could freestyle over the beat. I remember beatboxing for him both at school and at Plumes on different occasions. And that was probably my first time seeing rap performed live, and I loved it. Growing up, I'd written a lot of poetry because my grandfather had taught Shakespeare classes at Monterey Peninsula College, local community college, but I never knew what to do with that poetry. I found that rap music provided an outlet for it to be enjoyable for people that normally wouldn't ever sit down and read poetry, and I love that. Not only that, though, because rap music also talked about a lot of subjects that I would hear about at home, but just didn't have in common with my friends. Like, let's say if my mom got too drunk or high, she might talk about her cocaine days, or bring up one of my dad's stories from back when he was still a dealer. I didn't really have anyone in my friend group that could relate to that, but rap music sure did. And so by winter 2009, rap was my favorite genre of music by far, with rock and roll taking a close second. Extra lesson 2. Low-level castings are almost always based exclusively on talent. But they're the only ones that are. Story 2. Spring 2009. That spring, I decided to continue with theater, and I got a small part in Romeo and Juliet. But I could tell that I could tell that I wasn't at the acting level of my friends, and I needed more experience or more training. Because one of my best friends got cast as Tybalt, one of the main characters, and I was cast as the chorus, so I read the sonnet at the beginning of the show. It was quite a disparity between the two parts, and it showed me what I needed to work on, because low-level casting is based almost exclusively on talent, like I said earlier. However, the reasons I'd originally joined theater in the first place had paid off. I was around my friends more, I got closer to them, and I also met a girl in the cast that I would go on to date and would be my first kiss. Romeo and Juliet had 6 showings of the play between February 27th and March 8th of 2009, and it felt more worth it than the previous play. But I still disliked the idea that the show was over and never to be seen again after that. Fun fact 2. Somehow, I don't even have any photos of that show, but I do have a few from Plumes at least. That tradition continued through my graduation. Extra lesson 3. Chemistry is everything, and it's the best way to show off good acting. Story 3. Fall 2009. In the fall of my sophomore year, I auditioned and got a part in The Apple Tree. Essentially, it was 3 short plays back to back, and I had the male lead in one of the 3 parts. That made me very happy to see that I'd grown as an actor enough to get a lead of some kind, and it helped me to feel more confident about myself as a performer. It also got me more comfortable with clothing I wouldn't otherwise have worn. My dad still raves about the chemistry between me and the actress who played the female lead in my part of the play, and for years he encouraged me to reach out to her to act with her again. I never did, because I felt like it would be a little weird to reach out when, from my understanding, this woman hadn't pursued acting since her senior year of high school. But it showed me that chemistry was the most memorable part of a performance, more than my acting or her acting on their own. It seemed like it was a 1 + 1 = 3 situation, where us acting together felt better than either of us acting on our own. However, it was the only time we'd ever appear on stage together, and it wasn't recorded, so no one will ever get to see that. Is what it is. Fun fact 3. There were 5 showings of The Apple Tree between November 6th, 2009 and November 15th, 2009. But unfortunately, H1N1, also known as swine flu, was going around at that point. So most of the cast and crew got pretty sick. I mean, we pushed ourselves to be able to do the performance, but it wasn't uncommon to see kids sneezing blood backstage, myself included. I was throwing up too bad to show up for performance number 3. And so my friend Max had to play my role while reading from the script. To be honest, I felt really embarrassed about that. Ashamed that my health had prevented me from following through on promises I had made. But that was only a hint of the feeling of what was to come after the accident. But that's a story for another season. I do think it's worth noting that my first time feeling this way was because of a transmissible flu and nothing worse, and that the school faculty encouraged us to push through, show up, and potentially expose other people, rather than to stay home and prevent the spread. A good amount of people would change their mind on that concept after COVID-19, but it's important to remember that most of us grew up being pushed to do the opposite, from at least age 5 to age 18, and then got that same idea reinforced at work too. However, even back in April 2009, Ciudad de Mexico had closed all schools, all libraries, all museums, and all concert venues to try to prevent the spread of swine flu. Extra lesson 4. Certain things will not come naturally, but that's okay. Story 4. Spring 2010. I auditioned for the next school play that spring, an Irish play called The Cripple of Inishmaan, but I found that although I could do a British accent and a Scottish accent decently well, I could not pull off an Irish accent. At first, I was a little off-put by that. My friends had gotten roles in it. Even people that hadn't acted in the previous plays got roles in that one. I have some Scottish ancestors, the McKinnon clan, and apparently those Scottish genes are very prominent in me because to this day, I cannot sound Irish to save my life. If I have to give an example here. Well, look, if I need to sound like I'm from Scotland, there's a lot of things you can do to sound like you're from Scotland. You cannot roll the R's. You've got to say the right words with the right intonation. But when I try to sound Irish, it still sounds Scottish, doesn't it? It don't change. It's like I'm not even trying to sound Irish, but guess what? I'm trying my hardest to sound Irish right now. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work to save my life. I'm probably going to cut this part out because, maybe I won't. Fun fact 4. Since I didn't get into the play, I did varsity ultimate Frisbee instead. It was fun, and I was lucky my school even had that as an option. I was going to school around the time when football was being phased out for lacrosse and Frisbee, so we had a men's lacrosse team and a co-ed Frisbee team, but no football team. It's my understanding that pre-2010 that was very, very rare, but now more schools are leaning in that direction because of the concussions and other impact issues that go along with football. Extra lesson 5. Don't let one person's opinion of you change your opinion of you. Story 5, fall 2010. I got a male lead in the play Once on This Island, and that both cemented my confidence as someone who could actually be an actor, but also was a little odd because, like I mentioned in the previous episode, our performance of Once on This Island didn't have any Caribbean people in it at all, even though it's supposed to be about people from the Caribbean. This play only had 4 showings, which made it feel less worth it, but to promote the Horror Motion Picture Conservatory, Michael Buffo actually recorded that show and made DVDs of it. So it was the first show that I could watch again or show to others, and that made it feel much more worth it. By then I was also casting actors from theater in my short films, so the networking in theater had finally paid off in a career sense and not just in a personal sense. However, a friend's mother had 6 words for me after the show, and those words have stuck with me for the rest of my life. She came up to me and said, "Open your throat, for God's sake." And those words have kept me questioning how good my voice really was or is to this day. It made me worried that my voice sounds strained or that I in some way restrain it in a way that I'm unaware of, that I don't have to, though I was always generally told I had a decent to good voice. It's kind of interesting to know the exact moment that I became insecure about something. But that was the moment that I became insecure about my ability to sing. Group consensus is a whole nother situation, but when negative feedback comes from just one person only, you've got to realize it might be more about them than you. For example, I went on to become a lead singer in a rock band. If I'd relied on insecurity instead of confidence, that might never have happened. Fun fact 5, we're in story time now. So it's November 12th, 2010. It's after the opening night of Once on This Island. We went to Plumes, like we always do. But this night, one of my friends got their drink spiked with a party drug mixture and was almost arrested for being intoxicated in public while they were 16 years old. What this showed me is that it's fully possible for someone to be extremely intoxicated against their own will. This is what happened. The majority of the cast arrived at Plumes. We all ordered drinks, we sat down, waited for them to cool down enough to actually start drinking them. An attractive friend of a friend tagged along, a girl I'd actually been texting since November 10th, so about 10 days at that point. As we sat there, this girl took out a small vial, put a few drops of a golden liquid into her drink. A friend of mine asked about it. To preserve his anonymity, let's call him Jeff. The girl told Jeff that it was caffeinated honey and asked if he wanted some. Jeff said, "That sounds interesting. Never heard of that before. Sure, give it a shot." So she gave him the vial, and he poured in the amount of honey that he would normally pour into a cup of tea. That's important. She did a few drops. He poured a good amount in. So we moved to the tables outside despite the cold because we were loud and we didn't want to, cause havoc in the coffee shop. And the girl sat down on my lap, mentioning it was warmer that way. I was, to be honest, a little shocked at her forwardness, but obviously pretty happy at that point because we'd been texting for a while. But then my friend started to act a little erratically, and I got a little concerned about what was going on. So I asked her, while she was sitting on my lap, "Caffeinated honey?" And she explained that, depending on your point of view, she had either let my friend drug himself or she had drugged him for fun. She said that what she'd actually given him was a party drug mixture, a mixture of substances, in this case including THC and something in the speed family. And my interest in this girl sizzled out pretty quickly at that point. There was already a lot of drug use, prescription and otherwise, at home and around my family, and I did not want to get involved with a user who would be drugging my friends on top of that. So, sadly for my love life, but good for my overall life, I started to distance myself from her that night, spending more time taking care of my friend Jeff instead. So this Jeff, who will remain anonymous, bounced off the walls all night. We left the coffee shop and he took off down the street. He made it to a square that had a fountain. Luckily, the fountain didn't have running water, but he climbed it. And when he was at the top, a police officer showed up and started walking towards us. So I feel fear creeping up my spine as the cop was approaching us. And my friend, intoxicated as he is, looks straight at the officer and says, "It's a cold night, and if I had a jacket, I'd give it to you. But since I don't, I wish you the best of luck not freezing your balls off tonight." And he bolts off, me running after him to make sure we don't lose him in the city somewhere. hoping we're not about to get arrested or tased or something. Now, we didn't get in trouble for this because luckily my friend Max was a good talker. And the officer left that night believing he'd witnessed the aftermath of a kid's first shot of espresso. My friend explained who we were, that we'd just gotten coffee after a play. He managed to make the situation appear better than it was. However, if you get stopped while publicly intoxicated and test positive on a breathalyzer or a toxicology report, it's going to be very difficult to prove that you were drugged and didn't choose to partake in whatever the substance was by choice. So you need to be extremely careful about who you trust and what you accept from strangers. See, there's even lessons buried in the fun facts of this episode. As a side note, I don't think you realize just how much restraint it took to crop and blur photos and not post every photo I have from that night. Because I'm trying to walk this fine line of trying to respect the privacy of people in these stories while still teaching an important lesson about drug safety and stranger danger in what's hopefully an amusing way. And with films, that's an easy line to walk, right? There's a lot of publicly available info. There's not really much that I could say about a production that isn't already out there. Those people's names are attached to that production in the roles that they did. But a story like this is more private, it's more personal, and so that's why I want to hopefully correctly walk that line. But we'll see. Extra lesson 6. You never know what art form you'll really love. Story 6, Spring 2011. I skipped the spring theater show to be on the varsity track and field team, but I was a part of the Commedia Dell'arte show that my York School acting class put on. The same acting class I'd been a part of when the Horror Motion Picture Conservatory had given their presentation in the fall of 2010. The funny thing was that our teacher thought the conservatory was a scam after she saw the presentation Michael Buffo gave. But if I had believed her and hadn't signed up, I wouldn't have half the filmmaking lessons that made it into this season. So oddly enough, it's lucky I didn't trust the authority figure at that time. Make of that what you will. But as for Commedia Dell'arte, think of this show as a traditional Italian improvisational comedy, based on a number of stereotypical characters such as the doctor, the captain, the harlequin, aka il dottore, il capitano, e arlecchino. It sounds pretty aged. We don't usually use stereotype characters in the 21st century. Il dottore! However, this Commedia Dell'arte show was the most fun I've ever had working on a play, and to this day I remember it so fondly. There was no written script, which made it all the wilder to do live, but it was just so much fun, and I'm very glad that a friend of mine managed to get it recorded. It felt natural, and the jokes came through very well. I never would have thought traditional Italian improvisational theater would be my preferred style of acting on stage, but it 100% is. Fun fact 6. My character was named Brighella, and while preparing for the show, I started to try to learn Italian so that my Italian accent would sound more realistic. This would come in handy when I got lost in Venice, but you'll hear about that one later. Extra lesson 7. It is illegal to record plays published after 1964 without a license. Story 7, Fall 2011. I did one last play in the fall of my senior year, a show called Once Upon a Mattress. You might not recognize the name, but it was the story of the princess who could feel a pee underneath a dozen mattresses. It was not at all sexual the way my friends assumed it was. There were 5 showings of that play between November 8th, 2011 and November 14th, 2011, but there was no recording that time because York School discovered that you have to pay the publisher extra in order to legally record a famous show that you put on. As it turns out, the only plays exempt from this rule are plays in the public domain, most often meaning published before 1964. If it isn't in the public domain, it takes a compulsory recording license and paying royalty fees in order to sell recordings. Unfortunately, York was neither willing to pay the publisher nor willing to allow the recording to happen under the radar as had happened with Once on This Island. I was disappointed by that quite a bit, to be honest, and angry that the school would deny us a recording of our last play from high school after allowing the previous one to be recorded. After I graduated from high school, I never performed in a play again. It was filmed from there on out. I was never able to justify the time commitments compared to the money offered and how few showings there would be. Fun fact 7. 2 of my 3 long-term high school girlfriends acted in plays with me before we started dating, and my 3rd and final long-term high school girlfriend was in a film with me. So there's definitely a pattern there. A lot of that is proximity, because most of my high school days were spent in theater, hara, or sports, and so those were the people I got close to. On top of that, there were shared interests there, because the people around me were usually interested in entertainment in some capacity, often either film, theater, or dance. So mix proximity, shared interests, and teenage hormones, and, sparks start to fly. So although it wasn't intentional, and I did date other people as well, there was definitely a pattern that lasted through high school, but luckily didn't continue into college. Fun fact 8. On November 11th, 2011, everyone went to Plumes after our performance of Once Upon a Mattress. But my friend and I didn't have enough money to buy anything, even though we were hungry. So we actually ended up breaking into a nearby apartment. Someone had left their front door unlocked, and we stole some bread so that we had something to eat that night. To be honest, I think it goes to show just how much my home life had deteriorated, that I was motivated to steal due to hunger for the first time as a senior in high school. Now you might ask, wait, weren't you saving up money for a feature film at that point? And yes, I was. But back then, I had to go into the bank on a weekday between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. in order to transfer money from my savings account to my checkings account. So unless a parent was willing to drive me there during business hours, that wasn't money I had access to. The money I had for the week had gone towards eating lunch on school days, which meant I either had to ask someone for money or food, or steal it. And we stole it. This also shows that I wasn't comfortable telling anyone about what was going on. I think because there's a lot of shame and embarrassment that goes along with poverty, even if you're just a child and aren't the reason for the poverty. Especially in my situation, where the financial issues are one parent's fault and they're trying to hide that from the other parent. But, I don't need to get into the details of that right now. I think a lot of kids commit crimes without ever telling anyone the real reason why they did them, and are often punished for reacting to the living conditions that their parents put them in. But, that's situational. Obviously, that was my experience, might not be everyone's, but I think it was more people's experience than they're willing to admit. To wrap up this whole episode, joining a group of people with similar goals, even if not exactly the same, expanded my network and gave me a valuable life lesson throughout my high school career. So, with my lessons learned and experience attained, I graduated from York School and the Hara Motion Picture Conservatory, getting my high school diploma and trade school diploma in the same month. I was preparing for success however I could, and that felt like a huge step forward in the right direction. With a solid friend group and good career experience, I felt ready for the next step, making a feature film overseas. But anyway, those are my lessons, stories, and fun facts for the day. I tried to include info for friends, families, students, actors, networkers, stage managers, theater directors, impoverished children, and more, so hopefully you learned something along the way. This is the end of Season 1, so happy holidays, and I'll see you all again for Season 2 in January 2025. Bye for now.
Always on my side. Flamingo!
Yes, Dad?
Oh, Flamingo.
I don't think that's such a good idea.
It's a great idea.
Or the best side.